So a couple of months ago, I talked about the hardware in which I showed pictures of my rack, and I also briefly talked about my storage solution. From that video, you guys had a lot of questions about my storage solution, so today we're gonna kind of go over that. So when I first started doing video production, I knew that I needed a storage solution that had some type of redundancy. And if you don't know what redundancy is, you'll have a RAID array of a couple of drives, and then within those drives, you'll say, okay, there's one drive or two drives of redundancy. And now anywhere in the RAID array, if one of your drives dies, you won't lose any data at all. What'll end up happening is the bits that are in the other drives, they'll be able to recreate that drive when you purchase a new drive and insert it. It'll rebuild the volume. I knew that I wanted to have that because I've had the data scare where I'm potentially going to lose data. Luckily enough, I still had the SD cards that weren't wiped. So yeah, going back to the redundancy, so I wanted to get a system that was redundant. Now you can get one of two things. You can get a RAID enclosure, or you can get what's referred to as a NAS. The RAID enclosure will hook up directly to your computer. That's normally the faster of the two, but it's only going to be visible by that computer. Now there are ways to have that computer push that out to the network. So other computers can kind of talk through the computer it's connected to, but most situations you're just going to have it directly connected to the machine in which you're working on. Then the other way that you can do it is a NAS, which is network detached storage. Most people have heard of this, and it's just where you buy a device, you plug in Ethernet into it, and you connect it to your network, and then on your machine you can map that drive to be a drive on your system. Or you could just go through the web browser and access it and pull files off and put files on. So that's the other way of doing it. When I first started, I got one off of Newegg, and I wasn't really fond on paying a lot of money, so I ended up getting one that wasn't that fast, but it got the job done. It had 4 drives, and I set it up so it had one drive of redundancy. That means that one drive, I lose 20, in that situation with only 4 drives, I lost 25% of the total storage, but now any of the drives could die. I could pop a new one in and not lose any data. That was kind of what I really wanted. Now, one thing that I want to state here is redundancy isn't a backup. So if someone stole that box or if the house started on fire, I would still lose all of my data. It's not an actual backup. It's just redundancy. Some people get that confused and then they end up losing a lot more than they were anticipating losing. First system I got, it was working flawlessly. All I was really doing is taking my finished projects and putting it on there. And it was just like a place to archive all of my footage. And then I quickly started to get tired of finishing it, like copying the files to my computer, editing them, and then copying them to this box. It was kind of getting repetitive, so I wanted to take the files directly from the SD card, put them right onto the NAS, and then edit them. But with the box in which I got, I didn't really have that great of throughput. I might have gotten like 50 or 60 megabytes per second. So when I was scrubbing, it was kind of slow. And then also playback wasn't actually that bad now that I think of it. But scrubbing around or jumping around where it had to find the new files on the NAS, it was going kind of slow. So I wanted to look for something that was a bit quicker. And once you start to step up, with these pre-made systems, they start to get pretty expensive, and you kind of look for what performance you're getting, and it might be a little bit better, but it's not that great. One other thing at the time when I was looking these things up was there was a guy that was talking about how he had one of these, and I don't remember exactly what it is. I want to say Synology, but I could be wrong. And he had their flexible RAID where you can just put any size drive in there and it'll, make it work. He ended up losing the hardware died, and he had to get another Synology box to be able to read that RAID array. I didn't want to have that. I didn't want to have to buy another piece of hardware from a very specific company. So that was another thing. Now all of these systems, you can do like generic RAIDs, but they always have like their version of a RAID that might have, a bit of upside in some way, shape, or form. If it's speed, if it's the amount that gets cut out for redundancy, how redundancy works, you know, all that sort of thing. So I had that system, didn't really like it, wanted to get a new one. And I wanted a lot of bays. And then I seen the Synology had like their expansion enclosure, which was just, it didn't have any like system inside. It was just a place to put drives, and then it had a wire that connected to the main system. And that looked kind of cool. But then I came across a program called FreeNas. Now FreeNas is an operating system working off of FreeBSD, which doesn't really mean much to most. It didn't mean anything to me at the beginning, but let's just say it's well supported, meaning that it works with a lot of different hardware. So you get this operating system, and then you can pretty much put it on any hardware. Now there are recommendations to put it on specific types of hardware, but you can really run it on any hardware. And the cool thing is that you can run it on any hardware, and the hardware in which you run it on, you can upgrade it. So like a lot of these pre-made systems like we're seeing here, there might be slight upgrades you can do to them. You might be able to add a little bit more RAM. Most of the processors in these are soldered on, so you can't pull the processor out and change it. And then you're kind of stuck with the enclosure too. So what I ended up finding out is I found out about FreeNas, and then I found out that about enterprise hardware and the ability to buy recycled enterprise hardware, which just means that it was taken out of a data center and a third party bought it from the data center, like in bulk, and then they sell individual units on like eBay. So I was looking around at all the different hardware there is, and I quickly found out that a company by the name of Supermicro makes these units which use standardized board layouts, meaning the motherboard inside is standardized. So they use eATX on some of their disk chassis. And the cool thing about that is I can then go buy any motherboard, processor, and RAM and throw it in there pretty much. So, but I ended up buying one that had a little bit of everything in it. And it had 2 processors in there, it had 72 gigs of RAM, and on the front of it, it would hold 12 drives. So I thought that that was the really cool selling part, 12 drives, right? It had all this RAM and everything else. So I brought it, I got it home, installed it. I think at the time it was only like $300 and some odd to buy the system, and then like $60 to ship. Got it here. There's tons of tutorials on the web on FreeNas and how to get it started. Installed it, worked like a charm. At this point, I was only using the connectors that were on the back of the motherboard at this point, and so it was just gigabit. It had 2 gigabit ports, connected those to my network, and I was completely saturating that, getting like 110 megabytes per second throughput. And then I found out about what's referred to as 10 gig, which is 10 times that. So I could really have 1 gigabyte per second coming to my computer. And my initial problem was taking the footage from the card and putting it on this NAS. Now I could put it on this new NAS, and because this running on FreeBSD, I could almost run any hardware behind it because the majority of hardware is supported by it. So I would just go on to eBay, look up 10 gigabit card, and I bought it. I think at the time I bought 2 of them because I wanted them to do a direct connection. And at the time, I think I spent $30 on the 2 cards plus the wire because it uses a different type of wire. And, you know, if all of this stuff is interesting down the road, I can explain everything. I just wanted to briefly go over the stuff I have. And when I connected everything up, I made a file transfer and it did 650 megabytes per second. And I was like, whoa, that is quick. That's faster than all of my internal drives because now I have 12 drives working together instead of just 1 drive, you know, reading and writing to. And that's just as fast as like SSDs. Now there's some caveats with SSDs and their ability to seek things a little bit quicker than spinning disks, but spinning disks are a lot cheaper. So I was kind of like on the up and up at this point. And then from there, I start to learn about the file system that is on there, which is ZFS and its abilities. And, you know, I can have redundancy on here. You can do 1 drive or 2 drives or 3 drives. At this point, I think I had 2 drive failover. So it was ZFS 2. So I could lose 2 drives and still have all of my data. And the really cool thing about FreeNas, and a lot of the others are probably the same way. I don't have a ton of experience with all of them. But with FreeNas, even though I'd have drives that weren't working, it was still sending me the data just as fast, which was pretty cool. And then when I, you know, bought a new drive and plopped it in there, it would rebuild all the data that was on the drive that died, and then it would recreate it. Now all the others kind of do the same thing, but this one didn't really slow down the system that much. Maybe it was because of the system that I had. I'm guessing, you know, the more powerful of a system you have, the easier it is to do like a rebuild and stuff. But yeah, so I had the 12 drives working great, right? And then I needed more space. I found out that Supermicro had this thing called a JBOD. And all I needed to do is get 1 card that had mini SAS coming out and going into there. And then all of a sudden, I can hold another 48 drives. So now I have drives in there as well. And I have all different sorts of pools, you know, sets of drives that work together. And then I also have an SSD array in there because my main computer only has 1 SSD in it, and it's only like 400 gigs. Or maybe it's less than that, but it's very small. All it holds is the operating system and the programs. It doesn't hold anything else. Everything else is actually on this FreeNas box. Because I have it set up with 10 gig, it almost feels like it's on my computer. And if you do like network mapping, my computer pretty much looks at it as a drive that's on the or all the programs look at it as drives on the computer, which is a win-win. My Resolve cache files all go to a NVMe RAID that's on the FreeNas box. And so this has the ability to do all of this, which is great. But then it also has, with ZFS, it has the ability to do snapshots. So if you ever got into a situation where you accidentally deleted a file, you can set up recycling bins too, which is just another. So you delete it in your one folder. It then goes to a hidden folder, which you can just enable show hidden folders, and it's just called recycling. Click on that. It shows the user that deleted the file, and then you go into that. It shows where the file is, and then you can get your file if you accidentally deleted something. But if you deleted both of those, another cool thing is they have snapshots, and you can set up tasks that do snapshots like every couple hours or days or however you want to have it set up. On my main data pool that I have, like all the JRTV stuff, I work on it kind of frequently. So I have that do a snapshot every 6 hours. And then with all of this, like I said initially, this is, just a pool of data with redundancy. So if a drive dies, pop another one in. But this isn't a backup. And a lot of the other the other NAS devices do this as well, as you can then push it to whatever preferred service that you like. If it's Google Drive, if it's Dropbox, if it's Backblaze, any of these services that take backups, you could back it up to there. But what I wanted to do is, I was like, oh, I could just take make another one of these systems, take it to a relative's house, and have it there. So the cool thing with that is I can send the snapshot files, and I can, on the other machine, I can go back in history through all of those snapshots if I ever need to. So whenever a snapshot's created on my main machine here, it will then send it over to the other machine, and it makes a backup over there, which is really freaking cool, because I might only change like a little bit in one file. It won't copy over that whole file. It'll just copy over whatever the delta is, whatever that difference is, over to the other machine, and it works flawlessly. There's so many pros to this, and with the new Epic CPUs coming out, I'm actually thinking about, because this system's pretty old and it will on a lot of those other systems. I'm actually thinking about upgrading this to one of the new Epic processors, just because they look really cool. I'm probably gonna get like one that's at the bottom, because it'll be more than what I need, and it'll you know, kind of run circles around the system that I have now. It's freaking amazing being able to create all this stuff. Now, one of the biggest caveats that I do have to say here is, if you're not like a tinkerer or a DIYer, or if you're not really comfortable with, you know, doing stuff on the computer, this might not be the route for you. Over the years, it's changed a lot. They've changed the UI. They changed a lot on how it looks. That's why you can see here, it says like legacy. Let me actually log in here for you. But if you're not like the do-it-yourselfer, then it might be a little difficult, and it might seem like a little bit of a task. But there is so much content out there that you can learn how to do just about anything with this system. When it comes to like replication for an offsite backup, like I was talking about with my other system, or if it's sending it to one of these systems or services like Backblaze, setting up different jails and doing a whole bunch of different things. It does a lot of cool things. But my biggest thing is, now you have the ability to build it however you want. You want to throw in there a 10 gig card, throw it in there. You don't have to buy a whole new unit. You want to get a new processor and CPU, just go buy a whole new processor CPU. You can just take this whole thing. There's a backup file that you download, and then when you have the new system and you install FreeNas on that, it'll ask you, do you have like a file, or they call it configuration file? Do you have the configuration file? You pop in a USB, you know, use the configuration file, and boom, it's set up the exact same way that you had it on the old hardware. It's brilliant. I freaking love it. You know, I could talk hours and hours. You want full disk encryption? You can encrypt the disk fully, so that if you ever have to send, if one of your drives is bad and you have a warranty on it, you can send the drive and not be concerned with them being able to read files off of it, because the disk will be encrypted. If you ever need to rebuild everything, you can take all of your drives out, put them in the new FreeNas system, and FreeNas will look at those drives and say, hey, there's a data pool here. Would you like to mount this? And then if you do, then you'll have it here. If the disks have encryption, it'll say, hey, there's encryption, I need an encryption key. Then you pass the encryption key over, and then you're good to go. It's free. I just like the flexibility in it. You just need to be a little tech savvy, or have a willingness to like build it yourself. Pulling, you know, 800-900 megabytes per second, you know, off of a system, you can kind of have any files out there, any freaking raw files out there, and have it go right to this. Like I said, my main computer only has one SSD in it just for the operating system. And I have, I think, like 6 or 7 different mounted drives on my machine that all the software looks at it as a full device. So here's my main system. As you can see, if we look at this, if we look this up, so this is old. This is really, really old, but a lot of the newer systems, it will run circles around it. It really will. And then for my backup system, a little newer processor. This one doesn't have as much RAM, because all this is doing, I'm never reading anything from this. It's just backup. But then for this, I have like 8-10 terabyte drives in here. And I don't back up everything from this system over to that system, but I back up most of the stuff. That's what I have set up here. I just like this system just because it's so flexible. You can use kind of any hardware you want. You can build it up. And over time, as you get bigger and bigger, you can start to add different things to it and kind of run it all together. Instead of having 6 different boxes doing all different things, you can just build up your one system and have it always going with you as you build it up. And if you haven't seen, Synology and QNAP both had ransomware attacks, so that is a thing to keep in mind. But those systems are, I will say, are going to be more user-friendly to the novice that doesn't want to learn. They might not have the possibilities of being as powerful until you get into their larger, more enterprise-ish units. You can kind of start this having little to no money and have that same system, you know, grow with you. But that's kind of what I use. You see the hardware that I have, it's nothing spectacular. Only having 2 systems here that constantly are hitting it, you don't really need, you know, a super powerful machine. But having the flexibility to make it as powerful as you want, in my eyes, is worth it. So with that being said, my name's JR, and thanks for watching.